Welcome to the BLTnT podcast. I'm your host, Matt Loria, serving up real stories of business, life, technology, and transformations. You'll hear from interesting people about big changes from career shifts to life-altering decisions and the innovations that help make it all happen. It's about sharing those light bulb moments, pivot points, challenges overcome, and the journeys that inspire us to think differently. If you're on the lookout for insights to propel you forward, stories that resonate, or just a bit of inspiration on your next BLTnT move, you're in the right place. Let's dig in. Hello, and welcome to our latest edition of the BLTnT podcast. I'm really excited to be here with Fred Sievert, who is author, speaker, father, all-around great guy with an amazing history of transitions and a life well lived fully with just great inspiration for the people that have worked for him and for his family. And so can't wait to dig in with you here, Fred, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be there. I'll have to play this back so my wife hears what you just said.
Yes, and a stud on top of it all. Just a great looking guy that she should be very happy to have.
Right. Thank you.
So Fred, I mentioned, you're full of transitions. You and I met recently at a what's called a CBRT meeting. You were a speaker at one of the main events, and then you came to one of our smaller group events. And you've gone from a teacher to an actuary to the president of New York Life Insurance Company, to author, speaker, etc. I mean, you've just done some amazing stuff.
Yeah, it's been a very, I call it an uncommon and unusual spiritual and career journey. Lots of transitions along the way, often guided by guidance from the Holy Spirit and feeling called to do something different, even though everything you mentioned and I've done, I enjoyed immensely. But the time to change came, and I made the changes.
That's great. That's great. When we were talking and kind of preparing to get together to do this, I said, Fred, the thing that I admire most about you is that you worked in an environment, a Fortune 100 company headquartered in Manhattan, where you were able to figure out how to dance the line, let's say, between your faith and your integrity, along with being a leader that was available to all the people that worked for you. And so that's that's never an easy thing, right? Because you're going to have and come across people who are different than you, whether it's in your faith or whether it's just in your overall beliefs and integrity. And somehow you did it, right? Yes. Can you help us understand a little bit about what made that possible?
Yes. It was particularly challenging because New York Life, which had offices in 12 countries, many of them Asian countries, but also had a huge presence in New York, had employees and agents of all faiths. I mean, there were atheists, agnostics, Buddhists, Muslims, Christians of all denominations. And that made it challenging because, I couldn't really express my faith without people knowing, certainly, that I'm a Christian. So a couple of things that enabled that. One is I prayed very often at work. In my books, I say sometimes 10 to 15 times a day, where I felt, I'm not smart enough to make these decisions. I'm not sure exactly how to express myself. I'm not sure how far to go with my faith and expressing it. So I was relying on the Holy Spirit to guide me in that way. what should I say? How should I proceed? Even in the case of very, very difficult business decisions, you know, I would often say a short prayer. And I will also add that I wasn't praying out loud in front of my staff. You know, I felt that was going a little too far, even though every one of them knew I was a Christian. I mean, there would be luncheon events and other things where somebody would ask me to pray at the beginning, you know, say grace over the meal, and I was happy to do that. But I wasn't that overt. However, everyone knew I was a strong Christian. A couple of surprising things about that is one, the Jews at New York Life, and there were a lot of Jewish folks at New York Life. They would actually come up to me when I'd speak to a big audience. And oftentimes that was an audience of 5,000 agents and employees, where I would express my faith. I would tell a story about something that happened to me, and I felt it was providential, not just coincidental. And often the Jews would come up to me and say, "We really appreciate someone who's willing, at a high corporate level, who's willing to express his faith." So that encouraged me. That made me feel like, you know, I can continue to do this. Another thing, one time I did an interview with a guy who was a Catholic priest in Michigan, actually. I think his headquarters is in Michigan. He's a Catholic priest, and he was in charge of spiritual ministry to people who were in trouble or who had serious issues, addiction, whatever, or just family problems. And he said he'd be on the phone with somebody who might even be suicidal, and he'd say a short prayer, really short. He'd say, "Lord, I can't, you can, please do." So I found myself often saying that little prayer to God, but silently. You know, "I can't, you can, please do it." And I really had this confidence that the Holy Spirit was going to guide me on how to deal with difficult situations or difficult business decisions.
That's amazing.
So, you know, I would express these things. I mean, you have to have a certain level of courage.
Sure.
And it wasn't just when I was president of the company where, you know, I had a higher level of authority and it sort of enhanced my testimony. It was kind of all the way up through the organization. I mean, people knew they could trust me, that, you know, I had a strong value system and a strong faith. And I never really had a serious issue with that. I never even had an atheist or an agnostic challenge me over what I was doing.
Well, I think you nailed the word, right, which is trust. And so what's been going through my head as you've been speaking is that there must have been something that kept the trust of the people, because if you were exhibiting these, you know, your thoughts and faith and whatnot throughout your career as you climb through the ranks at New York Life, that obviously people still respected you, which means they trusted you, which means you were somehow keeping things safe in terms of the judgment. You were not casting a judgment on these folks that were, you know, if somebody was different than you or anything like that. And so I think
Yeah.
I think that had to be an undercurrent of, you know, what you were all about. So can you talk about trust for a second? I know that I can't remember who the Rachel something there's a video out there about that. She speaks about trust and how it is the number one aspect of every relationship, you know, business and personal. You know, how you leverage trust through your career.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of ways to do that, and my latest book, Fast Starting a Career of Consequence, has some several of the chapters deal with this issue directly or indirectly. Um, and I think it's, demonstrating a commitment to the company, getting to work early, staying late, uh, meeting all the objectives all the projects you're expected to do on time and under budget, being respectful of other people. One of the chapters I talk a lot about avoiding arrogance, because I think arrogance, even just perceived arrogance, is one of the biggest career blockers. And I have actually coached 3 or 4 executives on how to avoid arrogance, and it's actually in one of my chapters in the book. And I just set up, by the way, a new website. It's just an enhancement to my old website, and it's at fredsievert.com. And I'm putting up a blog every week, and it just started like 2 weeks ago. So one of those blogs is avoiding arrogance, how to avoid arrogance. So if someone went on my website, fredsievert.com, and go to the blog page, there's a blog on avoiding arrogance. And I think that's really critical, because I think your ability to advance in a company is much damaged by perception, even just perception. And I say perception because some people, just the way they carry their body, just the way they talk, and their demeanor can communicate arrogance. And one of the key ways, is just simply treating people with respect at all levels in the organization. I really made a conscious effort to treat the cleaning people and the other low-level workers doing various menial tasks in a big company, treat them like they're human beings, and they need to be treated like everybody else.
Sure.
And I'd often ask questions of people about their families and their kids, and that kind of thing really engenders a level of trust. But in terms of the business, getting things done, done under budget, on time, helping other people. That's another one of my chapters. And it was in my first book, where I said it was actually in the third book, which the genesis of the third book was my daughter had come to me, who was out of college, and she was in a low-level job. And she said, "Dad, how can I get noticed at this company and build a career?" And she says, I'm really tired of this, fulfilling marketing orders and not getting noticed. And so I thought long and hard about what kinds of things I would notice as president of New York Life, with 65,000 agents and employees, how I might notice someone deep down in the organization. And so I gave her 5 tips. And those 5 tips, she implemented them very well. She actually got several promotions in the next 4 or 5 years. And this was a big global cosmetic company.
Fred, do you mind if we, if Jackie, when we produce this up, that she puts those 5 tips up on the the screen here for us?
Yeah, I can send you that. Yeah.
Great. All right. So let's go through what those 5 tips are.
Okay.
And then I've got some comments for you, definitely on the perceived arrogance piece, which I think is just invaluable for people to learn.
Yeah. Well, the first tip, and some of them are much more difficult to implement than others, and I'll go through them all. The first one was demonstrate commitment to the company, which I started to talk about earlier. And, one of the key points I made to her was, get to work a little early and leave a little late, because what I was seeing at New York Life was people coming in the door right at the beginning of work or later, and people leaving, sort of packing up their desk with a half hour left to go, and bolting out of the company as soon as the workday was over. And I said to her, I noticed the people who were hanging around later, and your bosses will notice people who are hanging around a little later because they're the type of people who are working hard and staying long. And
Right.
even if they don't know who you are, you're going to get noticed. It's a simple thing to do. I mean, you don't want to hurt your balance with your family and your faith, but it's well worth the investment to do that.
Well, there's just not that many
Another,
ways to. I mean, there's not that many ways to stand out, rather other than small
yeah,
actions, right?
yeah. And so the second one was, I'm trying to remember the order of them, but they're in the book. They're
Is this
chapters six.
chapter 6, 8, 9, 11?
Yeah, six,
Okay,
8, 9, and
I
10.
actually have
So,
I have these up. So
okay,
develop cultural and organizational awareness
yeah.
is the second
That one
one.
I said to her, my success at New York Life was largely dependent on the fact that I came from a medium sized company where I had functional responsibility for almost everything.
Hmm.
And I get to New York Life, and they were very siloed. Almost every person had worked in their department their entire career and never interacted with anyone else. So um, I said to her, get to know people in other departments because she was also in a big company, but it's true even of a small company. Get to know people in other departments. When you have lunch with them or dinner or you even go out for drinks after work, don't talk about the latest TV reality show or series. You know, ask them what they do for the company, what their role is, and even volunteer to help them. And she was a French major in college and was very fluent in several languages. And I said, your company's in countries all over the world. Volunteer to do some translation for them, so they don't have to pay an outside firm to do it. And she did that. So, in culture, by the way, I'm glad you mentioned that because one of the blogs, I think we just put it up this week. If it's not this week, it'll be next week on my website, is about culture, understanding corporate culture. And I list a number of ways in that article on how one might understand corporate culture.
We talk about
So,
culture a lot, as from the executive to the boardroom basically of how are we going to instill a certain culture, but what you're actually explaining is from an employee's perspective, how can you understand what that culture is,
yeah,
demonstrate to other people that you understand that culture, and demonstrate that you understand the various roles of people in that organization. And so I think
yeah,
that's a
exactly.
really unique way to look at this because we normally look at it from the executive level down. How are we going to make this a culture of a family experience? Or how are we going to make this a culture of kindness or whatever? But really going from the employee standpoint and saying, hey, I'm going to put that on myself to learn this culture and embrace it and then add to it. I think
Yes,
is
exactly.
the real
You hit the
piece.
nail on the head. Did you read my blog?
I read your book, so
Yeah, you nailed it because culture can be this amorphous thing that nobody really understands. So you got to kind of you know do it in a granular fashion. What does it really mean? It's kind of the vibe of the organization. It's often driven from the top. It's the value system that's expressed not only by the company's leaders. I mean, that's what it's all about, and it's about what's forbidden here, what's accepted here, what's recognized here as good behavior. I mean, it's all those things, and I even tell people have come to me about. In fact, I'm just working with a young guy now, who's interviewing for new jobs. He's already an executive, but he's thinking about leaving his company. I've been mentoring him for several years, and he and I have had this discussion about culture. And I said, look, when you interview, you've got to try to get some understanding of the corporate culture, and you might be able to get that from their published articles, from what you read about the company, or even potentially from their annual report, seeing what they're emphasizing in their annual report. But you could also, if you know some people who work there, talk to them about it. So culture, I think, is very important.
Hmm. And the third piece is that the take charge of your own development.
Uh, which chapter was that?
That was 11.
Yeah, that wasn't in the original 5.
That wasn't okay.
No, but let me give
We'll
you
put
one.
that in the bonus round then.
Yeah, there you go. But I'll give you I'll give you the original 5, and if you want me to be more brief, just tell me.
No, no, no. So
Mission,
we're on 3 here. So yeah, let's hear 4 and 5.
yeah, the mission statement. And again, this also is one of my articles. I felt these were so important that that's one of the articles on my website, the blog article. And what I said to my daughter is, I said, look, here's something you can do very simply: is get an understanding of the corporate mission and actually memorize it. And she said to me, Dad, you really want me walking around quoting the corporate mission? And I said, absolutely not. I said, it'll be perceived as arrogant if you're doing that. But the reason I want you to memorize it is I want it embedded in your brain, because then you can test decisions that are made by the company, decisions that are made by your superiors, even decisions that you will be called to make at some point against the corporate mission, because I think it's critically important for companies to take actions that are well aligned with their mission. So she did that. The next one, and this might not be the right order, but the next one was about developing strategic thinking capability. And I consider that one of the best chapters in my book, because at New York Life, even as president of the company, I had people reporting to me who really did not understand at very high level the difference between strategy and tactics. And so I said to my daughter, I gave her a little history lesson that the term strategy was historically a war term. It was about how to defeat the enemy. And I said, in business, it's really about beating the competition and creating sustainable competitive advantage. So strategy is the ways in which you can do that, what you're intending to do to achieve sustainable competitive advantage. It's not the details of how you're going to do it. That's tactical. But strategically, and she said, when I first talked to her about strategy, she said, I don't even know what you're talking about. I mean, she was a French major. She had no business courses.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, look, there's ways you can understand your company's strategy by just going to their strategic plan. That should outline it well. And even if they don't publish their strategic plan, it might be in some of the published documents alluded to, especially if they're a publicly traded company, and hers was. I said, you can look at the analyst reports on the company, and you'll be able to garner what most of the key strategic initiatives are. But then I said, here's the tough part. I want you to identify 4 or 5 of your company's top competitors, and then do your research on them and try to understand what their strategies are and where they may be failing relative to your company, and where they may be, succeeding in capturing market share from your company because of their strategic approach. So she did that. She actually went a step farther. I might have mentioned this in the book. She started buying the products of the competitors and becoming a customer of the competitors. Wow. So she could understand their products, what was unique about them, and also become someone who's getting their emails and is able, because she's a customer, to talk to them.
Understand the client journey as it was experienced from the competitor's client.
Absolutely. So she did a very good job with that, and I think that might be one of the ways she got recognized quickly, is having an understanding of the competition. Because even New York Life, big company, but it was in a marketplace that had 2,000 insurance companies. So when I first got to the company, I started talking a lot about competition, and everybody would say, "We don't have any competition. We're New York Life. We're everybody's AAA company." I said, "Are you kidding me? We definitely have competitors. We could be losing market share to some of them." So there's a page in my book. I think it's like page 104 or 105 that gives a list of questions you can ask yourself, and this is also in the blog article, about your company that will immediately develop strategic thinking capability as you try to answer those questions, or you go to other people in the company to get answers to those questions. The final point of the first five, and I added five more in the book, but the first five I gave to my daughter, was probably the hardest one for her. And I said, "This will be the hardest one for you, but I'm going to make it easy." Because she never had a math class in college, she never had an economics class, she never had a business class, never had an accounting class. And I said, "I want you to get a fundamental understanding of the financial underpinnings of the business." And I said, and she nearly panicked. I could see it in her face. And I said, "Now wait a minute. I'm going to make this simple. You don't have to understand every line item in the income statement and the balance sheet. Forget about it. It's not worth your time. But what I want you to do is understand how the income statement, which produces a profit or a loss, feeds into the balance sheet, which is, assets minus liabilities equals net worth. I just want you to understand. Find somebody in the accounting department who can kind of explain this to you and answer questions." Then I said, "I want you to set up a spreadsheet of 6 entries." And she knew how to do an Excel sheet. So you're going to put in 6 entries, and you're going to fill it in every quarter. It's going to be easy. It's going to take you 2 minutes. You get the financial statements of the company, and you list the following 6 items. From the income statement: total revenues, total expenses, net bottom line, profit or loss. And then from the balance sheet, 3 items: total assets, total liabilities, and net equity. That's it. You list those 6 numbers, and then track it every quarter. And she was a publicly traded company, so it was easy to get every quarter. And I said, "You're going to be the only person, you probably be less than 2% of the people in the company will have ever looked at this." And I said to her, "I'm president of the company, and I've got 12 people reporting to me. If I went to a staff meeting and I said, 'Somebody tell me what our revenues were last quarter,' they wouldn't have a clue. And they wouldn't even probably want to guess, because they'd be so far off. People get, buried in immersed in their own function, and they're not looking at these things." So I said, "You're going to be way ahead of everybody else, because you're going to understand." Now I said, again, you don't want to be perceived as arrogant, so be careful how you use that. But when you go back to your accounting department friend, you can say, "Hey, I noticed that revenues were going way up, but the bottom line was going down. What's up?" Or, "I noticed we had a big increase in assets this last quarter. Can you explain that to me?" Or, "Why is net equity changing the way it's changing? Is that a problem or no?" So she did that, and she started having meetings with the accounting department to talk about that. And then I finally said to her, now that you've understood that, and you've been tracking it, go to the guy in accounting, and I want you to ask, I called it the killer question. In fact, I wrote an article about that was published, and it was about all 5 tips. And the Market Watch blog, which was the Wall Street Journal, called me and said, "We want you to write an article for our posting on the online posting of a blog." And I said, "Sure, I can expand on these 5 tips." They said, "No, we want you to expand on tip number 5. And they often, when you do this, I've done it a few times, they will change the title of the article, and that was fine. They didn't change the article, but they changed the title, and they called it the killer question. And they have something like 20 million viewers a month of that
Wow.
blog. So I got a lot of attention.
What was the exact killer question?
Oh, yeah, I didn't tell you the question. The question was, go to your accountant and say, very simply, and I said, say it exactly the way I'm saying it to you. What drives the profitability of this business? And I said to her, the accountant may even pause and say, I'll have to get back to you on that.
Mm-hmm.
Even the accountant might have to say that. And I said, well, be persistent. What really drives the profitability of the business? And I also said to her, the CEO of your company, big company, I said, the CEO of your company is probably going to hear that this girl in the marketing department is asking questions like this.
Yep.
And I said, there's no better way to distinguish yourself and at least create the possibility of significant advancement within the company. So those are the 5. I don't want to get into all 10, but there's 5 more tips in the book, and I think it's had a big impact on a lot of people.
Well, I just like that. I mean, when I think about your piece of advice about the develop a strategic thinking capability, right? What you've really done here in your tips is you've said, let's take all the elements that make up a company and let's look at them, which is the best way to understand strategy, right? Because otherwise everything looks like a tactic. If you're only looking at it through the one small lens of I'm this and this is what I do. I'm a marketing person and I make this blog or I make this post or whatever. But what you're saying is let's go through, understand the finances of the business. Let's understand the people and the roles of the business. Let's understand the culture of the business, the mission of the business, and then let's understand ourself better and show that ourself, is the person who's demonstrating commitment. And so
Yeah,
right there, you take all those elements and you can't help but become a strategic thinker.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Did you
it's
ever
really
read?
understanding the whole scope of what the company is trying to do.
Yeah.
And
Did you ever read the
at.
book? It's an old book, but a nice new title. The new strategic selling.
No,
Remember that? I don't know if you remember that
I
book.
should.
Anyway,
Yeah, I've heard of it. Haven't read it.
the long story short is the moral of the story is it's a major reminder that no decision is what it appears to be on the surface, and no one makes an individual decision in companies. Rarely ever. There's always a hidden decision maker, whether it's the person's spouse or the board or the president or whomever. Um, and there's always a multitude of people who are influencing this purchasing decision in some way, shape, or form. And
Yeah,
so it's the reminder that you have to look at things strategically and not just, oh, Fred wants to buy this and he's the president of New York Life. Well, Fred's going to
yeah,
go to his VPs and his VPs are probably going to go to their directors. And then you know what? Fred's going to sit at the dinner table at night and say, honey, what do you think about this? I'm dealing with this big thing at work, right? And before you know it, all of those influences are playing into your purchasing
that
decision. And I think that's
that's a great observation because as you're talking, I realize how many times I had to do that, and also how many times I became kind of the mediator between 2 conflicting departments.
sure.
Typically, the finance department and the marketing and sales area,
Yeah.
where they don't understand the importance of the bottom line in marketing, and they feel that the finance guys don't realize I'm never going to sell anything if we do what you want us to do.
Right.
So, you have to balance that. You definitely have to balance that and try and accomplish growth in both areas. Growth on the top line, revenues, and growth in the bottom line. To me, that's. I wasn't planning on bringing this up in a meeting, but I think it's in my book somewhere. I was on the board of a big company, Express Scripts. They do Pharmaceutical Benefit Management. And I was on their board because New York Life bought them. And we bought them for $3 million, all in, everything. The company, the buildings, the liabilities as well. But for $3 or $4 million, we bought the company in 1992. And I was on their board for about 10 years. And I learned so much from their CEO, it was unbelievable. Because he had, if you asked him for his elevator speech on what his plans were, and he knew the details, the cold, but his elevator speech was, I want to achieve 30% top line growth and 30% bottom line growth every year. Now, that's very aggressive. But when you set that as an objective, and by the way, he actually did it. And when you set that as an objective, and that's really your standard, and the whole company knows it, people are thinking outside the nine dots on how we're going to possibly do this at the same time get strong growth and strong profits. And that company, by the way, this is an unbelievable statistic. That company from 1992 to when I retired, like 15 years later, became the 22nd company on the Fortune 500 list.
Wow.
It grew to a net worth, net capital of $58 billion, and it started at $3 million.
Wow.
And it really was because he simultaneously achieved this remarkable history of top line and bottom line growth. So I tell people probably the most important thing I'm going to say at this presentation is success in business, especially if you're an entrepreneur, can come from that kind of a strategy. It may be difficult to implement, but that kind of an attitude that we're going to find a way to grow top line and bottom line. And the way you do that is you price your company and your products in a way that the competitive advantage over your competition will enable you to do that, even if you're priced higher than them. You provide other ancillary benefits and features and service that they don't provide, and that's what he did with Express Scripts. I'm guessing, Matt, you've had some successes like that. I mean, that's pretty extreme, but I'm guessing that running your company, you're implementing a lot of the things I'm talking about.
We're doing our best there, right? I mean, we're trying to grow top line and bottom line at the same time, not as aggressively as the gentleman from Express Scripts, but we do have a vision, mission, and values that we follow, and you're certainly making me think about how do I tighten up that vision to make sure that everybody understands, what we need to do with those numbers. Our mission is to help other people accomplish their mission through technology. So that reminder of if you're a service desk technician on the phone with Fred who needs help with his computer is needs to be front of mind, right? How do I help Fred get back to work as fast as possible? Secondly, if we're selling you something new, as an upgrade, how are we making sure that we're following the discipline to say, how is this helping this person accomplish their mission through technology? And then all the while doing it under the golden rule, right? Treating others how they want to be treated. And we modify that with the treating others in a way better than they ever expected to be treated is the awesome rule.
Exceeding expectations. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I know you talked a little about this when I spoke to the group, the CBRT group.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised to hear you repeat that. It's an important element of your own strategy, corporate strategy.
Yeah. Well, some things that have come up for me, and I think almost in every episode, I think I quote Patrick Lencioni and the ideal team player as humble, hungry, and smart, right? That is another way to encapsulate very simply all of the elements and fast start tips that you gave to your daughter. So some things kind of.
I'm glad you mentioned humility because I focused on that a lot.
Well,
Taking,
your piece about perceived arrogance is really where I want to kind of hone in on, because I think that humility piece is the piece that a lot of us miss when we're moving fast in the day to day business, whether you're an executive or you're an employee, or wherever you play in. Um, there's a statement that's we judge ourselves by our intentions and we judge others by their actions, and that's a dangerous thing, right? Because
yeah,
if we're not taking in that 360 view, or getting feedback and then actually processing the feedback of, hey, you know what, Matt, you came off as pretty arrogant when you said this, or Matt, every time you do this, if we don't listen to the other person who's giving us that feedback, we're never going to get better. And I think that the perceived arrogance piece, no matter what level of the organization you're in, it has to be something that you're reminding yourself of on a daily basis. How am I coming off to this person?
yeah, absolutely. And you're triggering more thoughts in my mind, some of which are in my earlier books. But I had an encounter with President Clinton. I won't go through all the reasons I met him, but it was after his scandal, and so I wasn't all that excited about meeting him. But I learned some things from him in that meeting, and I think it was in my first book, Lessons from President Clinton or something like that. The book was called God Revealed. But one of the things he said to me when we first got introduced, and it was at the White House, and we chatted for a minute, and I told him, I'm president of New York Life, and he said to me, "You hired away one of my best advisors." And I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, you hired away my foreign advisor, her name was Sandy Kristoff, and I'm still not over that." And I said something like, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "I loved her because she always told me what I needed to know instead of what I wanted to hear."
Wow.
I thought that was a great, great statement. And I can't tell you how many times I told people on my staff about that. Tell me what I need to know, not what I want to hear. Because, people don't want to give you bad news. But I'd rather get the bad news and deal with it than not know about it and have it get worse. And so I never really punished people for something bad that had happened, even if it was their mistake. I mean, unless something was really egregious. But I always felt like they're comfortable coming and talking to me. Again, Matt, it's the trust issue. They trusted that I really wanted to hear it. And they came to me when there was an emerging problem. So I just thought of that when you talked about humility
That's great.
and trust.
This episode of the BLTnT podcast is sponsored by Auxium, business IT and cybersecurity designed to outsmart chaos. And powered by Juniper Networks. Automate your network with Juniper Networks and the Mist AI platform, the world's first AI-driven wired and wireless network. Let's go through a little quick. We've talked a lot about business, but we haven't really talked about kind of life for you. In terms of let's talk some kind of your career path, your family path. You've got some kind of interesting things that I've gone through some similar things as well. But you've changed careers. Started off as a teacher, became an actuary, became president of New York Life Insurance. Can you kind of just hit me with and hit anybody who's viewing this with your kind of major touch points and kind of walk through what family was like during those transitions?
Yeah, sure. That's something I love to talk about. I think I spent time with Andrea on that one. Yeah, I'll make it. I was asked at my church to give an elevator speech about my spiritual journey. And so I'm going to give you that like really rapid fire. Maybe we need another session to cover all of it. But I was raised in a non-worshiping family as a kid in Detroit, lower income family. But both parents worked two jobs. And I had one brother. And I had this mystical adolescent experience at age 12 where I really felt I was in the presence of God. And that God was speaking to me. I was asking a whole lot of questions because I'm a baby boomer and had a whole lot of kids in my neighborhood of different faiths. And we'd talk, and I was confused. So I'm asking all these questions. I'm in my bed contemplating all this on a summer day, and I'm home alone. And I'm going through all these questions in my mind. I'm not asleep. I'm not hypnotized. And I feel myself lifted, an out-of-body experience where I felt I was being lifted and in God's hands. And God was saying to me, not audibly, but I felt he was saying to me, you have a lot of questions. Answers will come in time. And yes, I will always be with you. That gave me kind of a lifelong faith, a very strong faith, and a burning desire to learn more. Then, I go to college, and of course I do a lot of crazy things that kids do in college. But I was still believing in God and not really very involved in church at that point. But I got married to a Christian woman, and we went to church. I loved her grandmother, who was a big influence on me. And we were trying to have children. We were told by a couple of different fertility doctors that neither one of us would ever have children. So we adopted 3 girls. And lo and behold, after 16 years of marriage, along came the miracle of Zachary, my first son, first natural born son. And then 18 months later, along came the miracle of Corey, my second natural born son. And these really were miracles. I mean, we were told this would never happen.
Were the children your adopted children? Or were they babies when you got them, or how
Yeah,
did?
2 of them were. One was 5 months old. There's 2 Korean orphans and 1 special needs child. The 2 Korean orphans, one was 5 months old and one was 9 months old. They weren't siblings, but we adopted them at different times.
Okay.
And then the special needs girl was 2.5 when we adopted her, and we knew she had some special needs, not real serious, but serious enough.
And how's
And we
everybody
adopted,
doing today? How old is everyone today? And are they all still with
outstanding.
us?
I mean, yeah, yeah, it's a wonderful family situation, and I'll get to that in a minute because there's something interesting, unusual about that as well. But then, so we had the 5 kids, 3 adopted, 2 natural born, and somewhere in that, after we had the kids, I was working in Michigan at a medium-sized company, and I really felt a calling to leave the company. And for some things, not because they were rejecting me, but because things weren't going quite right. And I won't explain all that. But so I felt called to move. So here we are, a young family with 5 kids, and I decide to move to the east, get a job in Manhattan at New York Life with 5 young kids. I mean, this is an enormous transition, but I really felt that God was pulling me in that direction, and that New York Life was not only going to be a place where I could thrive, but also could express my faith. And there were reasons that I felt that way. Then, after that happened, when we ended up at New York Life, when I was at New York Life, by the grace of God, we ended up with 5 grandkids. Strangely enough, 3 who were adopted and 2 were natural born. And talk about an unusual decision. I'm president of New York Life, 59 years old, and I decide I'm going to retire early and go to divinity school. Now, there was no reason for me to retire. No one was forcing me out. But I will say this, because of my communication of my faith, no one was surprised by it, really. When the CEO, because we were in 12 countries, I probably had 12 retirement parties, one in each country. And the CEO or whoever was there with me to recognize the event always said no one was surprised that Fred's retiring to go to divinity school. So I did that at age 59. And there were a couple of other events that led up to that that really convinced me to do this. And they were definitely faith-based kind of epiphanies.
And it
One
was
was observing
Yale Divinity School that you went to?
Yale Divinity School. The reason I chose Yale, and it really, in many ways, is much more liberal, both theologically and politically, than I am. But it was close to home, and I knew a professor at Yale Divinity School, and my own senior minister had gone to Yale Divinity School. So I was being coached by those guys. And I went, maybe a little reluctant. I probably would have preferred to go elsewhere, but it was convenient. I mean, I lived like 20 minutes away. And it was a great experience. I mean, really a great experience. I felt I could express myself in any way I wanted to, and I could express my more conservative views without getting attacked. I mean, it was very civil discourse, and I learned a lot. I mean, I really learned a lot. I mean, I was there for 4 years. It was a 2-year program. It took me 4 years to complete because I was on several boards at the time. But then, I get through that and I decide to write some books. And I always felt I wrote pretty well, but I wanted to tell my story, and it was all faith-based. The first book, God Revealed, was 31 encounters I felt I had with God over the course of my life. And the subtitle of the book was Revisit Your Past to Enrich Your Future, because I didn't want it to appear like memoirs. I wanted it to trigger in other people memories of their own potential encounters with God that they may have even missed, but in hindsight realized God was intervening in their lives. Then, as a result of that, I did quite a few TV and radio interviews, and a lot of small group Bible studies, men's breakfast, women's breakfast. And I talked to them and tell my story, and then ask them to break into small groups and tell their story. Grace Revealed. And the subtitle is Trust in God's Strength in Any Crisis, because that book was about people who were in severe crisis that I discovered. Half of them I knew already. The other half I learned about when I was doing these speaking engagements. So that was book number 2. And by the way, the 700 Club called me and said, we'd like to talk to some of the people who you write about in your book. And do we have your permission to do that? And I said, yeah, you have my permission, but you got to talk to them. So they interviewed seven people, I think it was 5 people in the book, and chose 2 of them to do feature videos of. And they sent me a note after these 2 videos aired on the 700 Club, and said at the end of each of these videos, we had 8,000 prayer requests come in.
Wow.
On the topic that was discussed. One of them was about sexual abuse as someone who had been abused sexually as a child, and the other one was severe addiction and suicidal tendencies. So, my passion has always been to impact people's lives in a positive way by speaking and writing about my own faith. And this was kind of a reassurance of that and reinforcement of that. And then, as I said earlier, the genesis of the final book, I won't call it the final book, my most recent book. There might be another one in the works, but was my daughter and the questions my daughter posed to me. And what was interesting about that book is the market. When you write a book, because now I've written 3, the publisher wants you to zero in on a pretty tight market. And so that book, Fast Starting a Career of Consequence, was written for Christian students about to graduate from college. That's who I originally wrote it for. Then the pandemic hit, and the subtitle was originally Christ-Centered Advice for Entering the Workforce. Entering the Workforce. And when COVID hit, it hadn't been published yet. It was in a final manuscript. And after COVID hit, I went back through and revised the manuscript because I realized it no longer was just going to be for Christian college students. And in fact, the market expanded dramatically because so many people were either out of work, looking for new jobs, coming back from military service, coming back from child rearing years. So I changed the subtitle to Christ-Centered Advice for People Entering or Re-Entering the Workforce. So I really felt it was providential that the market had expanded dramatically from college students about to graduate to a much bigger.
I would even argue, though, that book really speaks to anybody who's an employee or a leader in a company. I mean, I think it's so broad, and I don't even think that it has to be somebody who's looking for a Christ-centered approach per se either.
Yeah,
I think it's a very broad book that is would be valuable for anyone who's in business, period, to read. It's a great reminder of strategic thinking, holistic thinking, 360 thinking, and blind spots that most people have in regards to how to get noticed, how to make a difference, and other positive influences that you can have inside of an organization.
I'm glad you brought that up because I should have mentioned that if you went on Amazon.com, there's probably, 150, 160 reviews on Amazon. I would say almost half of them, maybe even more than half, people say what you just said, that this book is not just for Christians because of the value of the business advice. So, it just goes to show you how fast that market expanded given the environment.
Sure. So there was a story that you gave that I want to just kind of talk about doing the right thing, doing the right thing or doing things right, saving a family from ruin at age 50. Would you tell that story? And obviously put whatever purviews you can put on it from the perspective of, your own internal team to you, to the family that it affected, and explain, why you did the right thing, how you did the right thing, kind of all of that.
Yeah. Well, I at that point, I don't think I was yet president of the company. I was an executive VP running the biggest business unit.
I remember it was in the clip that I had read this in. It was you're around 50 years old when it happened.
Yeah, right. So I was running all of marketing, sales, finances, service. I was running all the functions. And I got invited to the $1 Million Roundtable meeting, which is a big, huge industry meeting recognizing agents every year who sold a certain amount of business. And it was attended by 7,000 attendees from around the world. And New York Life, there were 200 companies represented. So this was not a New York Life event. So I go to the meeting, and I'm sitting near the front of the stage, 7,000 people. And they had an award that was given every year. And it was a competition. It was called the Real Life Stories Competition. And agents and clients would submit their stories. And it was usually about the value of life insurance. So I'm sitting there, and I knew the guy who presented the award, David Woods. And he gets up and presents the award, and then they show a video of this particular case, one winner, out of all the submissions. And the video starts, and it's about a family, young family, probably in their 30s, couple of kids, young kids, and the husband had applied for life insurance on a Friday, was killed in an automobile accident 2 days later on Sunday. and they were interviewing the wife who was talking about the great value of insurance and how it covered their mortgage. She could pay off her mortgage. She had money to put aside for the kids' education. They even interviewed the kids, the two young kids playing on a swing in the backyard, who, you know, were talking about their dad, and there was not a dry eye in the house. I mean, it was very emotional. Now, the tears were running down my cheeks for a different reason. It was an emotional story, but it started to sound familiar to me. It sounded like a case that had come across my desk about 3 or 4 months before, with a note from the legal department asking the only case I had ever received where they, as an executive at New York Life, where they asked me to decide on the claim payment, give it approval or deny it, and the law department was recommending I deny it. However, and by the way, as I'm watching this video, at the end, they interview the agent, and I realize this is actually the same case. Okay? Because they're interviewing the agent from New York Life. And I nearly fell to my knees. I mean, this was like a message from God to me, because what I decided when I got that material from the law department, I started reading through it. I didn't know about the kids and the mortgage. I didn't know anything. I knew how big the policy was, and I knew it was going to hit the bottom line and be a loss for New York Life. And the lawyers were saying, because there was no premium with the application, the coverage was not legally bound. So we do not have to pay this claim. But there was an extenuating circumstance that on the desk of the deceased was a check written out to New York Life for the premium payment. And I looked at it and I thought, what's the right thing to do here? I mean, this guy was ready to pay the premium. He wrote the check. I think they even looked in the investigation at a handwriting expert. And he wrote the check and signed it. So literally, I looked at this, Matt, for maybe 1 minute and said, it's approved.
Wow.
And, when I tell that story to agents and employees, which I told many, many times, I said, Fred Sievert was not the hero of that story. It was the agent. It was the agent who persisted in making the sale. It was the agent who, probably persisted in a claim payment and probably insisted you go to a higher level to get a decision. It was the agent that was the hero. And I said, any of you would have done the same thing I did. But to me, that encouraged me, even though I was doing good work at New York Life. It was God intervening.
Wow.
And, that encouraged me to go to divinity school. Now, I went several years later, but still, it was a big deal and a big impetus for me. The other one, I won't tell you the whole story, was my viewing a quadruple bypass surgery in India. And not from an amphitheater way above the operating table, but the chief of staff asked the anesthesiologist to step aside, and I was at the head of the table watching a quadruple bypass surgery that was happening 18 inches from my face. And I'm seeing this chest opened up with a beating heart. And it was a profound spiritual moment for me. Because how often do you think about your heart beating like that? And it can beat for 70, 80, 90, 100 years. This had to be God's creation. I mean, I was crying. They put me in booties and a mask and all that. And I was crying and thinking, I hope my tears aren't falling on the patient's head. But the truth is the mask was capturing my tears. But it was just so profound. I couldn't imagine how any doctor couldn't realize the wonder of God's miraculous creation.
Hmm. Hmm.
So those were kind of the elevator points in my elevator speech. It took a little longer than that to tell, but that's how the whole unusual situation. One more point.
Yeah.
Talk about uncommon decisions. I'm retired. I've written 3 books. My wife and I are living on Cape Cod and loving it. You know, we're at a great church and we're living at Cape Cod. And I really felt called as I'm aging to potentially move together with some of my other kids. We have 5 kids, 5 grandkids. So my daughter lived in New Hampshire. She was close. My special needs daughter was living in Massachusetts. She was close. The other kids were either in Michigan or Utah. And we started looking for a house in New Hampshire that we could move into with 8 of us. 2 daughters, a son-in-law, 3 grandkids, and my wife and I. We made the decision and put an offer on a house even before or actually after I realized New Hampshire's the least church state in the Union. And we cut a deal to buy this house. And I did it on faith, felt I was being called to do this, recognizing that it was going to be really hard to find a church. And my wife and I, live streamed services from 20 churches in the area, couldn't find anything we liked, but we made the move. And the house we're living in is a former ski lodge that's at the top of the mountain. So I'm getting right now 45-mile views out my office window. Wow. With spectacular sunrises and sunsets.
Now, Jackie told me that you shared some pictures that we're going to be able to share on here as well.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Great. Well, we'll make sure everybody sees those.
So here's the miraculous thing. We live streamed all these churches and we didn't like them. And I didn't want to drive 30 miles in the snow, to get to, in the winter, to get to a church. And so we end up staying in this country inn in town. New London's the name of the town. And we live 3 miles from New London. We stay in this country inn, and to make a long story short, there's a family there that's there only because their daughter's getting married in town. But the mother, father, and the grandfather and grandmother I met while we're staying there. And the father and the grandfather were both ministers, but from North Carolina. So I explained to the grandmother at breakfast one morning what I'm looking for in a church and how, I'm trusting God to put me in the right place. And we made this move on faith, and I'm hoping we find what we want. She says, what do you want? I said, well, I want a Bible-based, Christ-centered church with a great preacher and a warm and welcoming congregation. She says, I'm going to get on my phone because I've got a friend who lives about 20 miles from here and see what she says. So this is like 7:30 in the morning. She calls her. The woman answers the phone. She explains what we want in a church. And she says, the woman on the phone says, he's got what he wants right there in New London. And I said, what? She says, yes. The First Baptist Church of New London is exactly what you want. And what the problem was, when we live streamed that church, they had a visiting minister. And the church looked empty. And I thought, I don't know if that's right. We didn't like the minister. I didn't know he was a visiting minister. I thought he was their full-time minister. And I didn't really get too excited about his sermon. Turns out, the guy who's the real senior minister is phenomenal. And the church has got plenty of people in it every Sunday. So we now live closer in proximity to our church than we've ever lived our entire life.
Hmm.
So it's been marvelous. My wife's a deacon. I'm a trustee. I'm running the a capital campaign for the organization. We're about to exceed our goal in about 2 weeks, and it's been marvelous.
Do you have all the
So God
proper
did.
insurance coverages for that church?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
we do. It's one of the first thing I checked.
Good. Good.
Are you covered, especially for liability insurance?
Great.
But yeah, I checked that.
So while we've been talking, I've been working on a title for your next book. I don't think I have
Whoa,
it. I
great!
don't think I have it perfect here, but I think it's a. So your most recent book is tell us the title. It's Fast
Fast
Start.
starting a career of consequence.
Okay. So I think your next book, let's not call it your final book, is leveraging a career of confidence into a retirement of relevance. And I
Whoa,
think that's you. I think
Bob Buford. It's a Bob Buford book. Yeah, I like that.
yeah.
Thank you. I'm
I
gonna
think
I'm
I
gonna
think
ponder that.
I think well, I mean, you don't have to take it. It's okay. And then there's licensing fees involved if you want to use it. I don't know if you'll want to pay the fees on it or anything like that, but uh, we can work the
Well,
details
by the
out if
way,
you like.
we've hit on almost all the 4 blog articles I put on my website. One of them is called "Happier, Healthier, and Younger in Retirement."
That's
It's
good.
an article I wrote that was asked by the Wealth Channel magazine asked me to write an article about retirement. And I think they thought I was going to write about, investing and preparing for retirement. And it was much more about, you know, identifying your spiritual gifts and following your calling and that kind of thing. So it's in the it doesn't talk as much about faith because it was for the Wealth Channel magazine, but a lot of people have told me that article has helped them tremendously.
Interesting.
So you got 4 blog articles you can read that we've already talked about, I
There we
think.
go.
Yeah.
Well, if we do get together again to do this again, I would love to hear more about kind of the multi-generational living situation, and how that's
Yeah.
working out for you guys and how you've made that work for you.
Yeah.
And because I did not hear about anyone strangling each other yet or anything like that. So somehow
Nothing like that.
you're all getting
I'd be
along.
happy to talk about that, but I'm going to have to sign off here pretty quick because I got
Yep, we
another
do
call.
too. We do too. So I think in our next segment, I think we would want to talk about that with you. But I really appreciate you being here with us. You have been chocked full of. The only thing we missed was technology. We can get that next time. But the
Yeah,
transformations, I mean, you are a man of transformations, and no moss is growing on this rolling stone. That's for sure.
I've heard that. Okay, thanks so much,
Thanks
man.
for being here.
Appreciate the time. Hope to see you when I'm in Michigan again.
That would be great.
Yeah,
All right.
take care.
So long.